To help unravel the secrets of Mariano Rivera's cutter, we enlisted pitching coach Tom House, who's worked with greats like Nolan Ryan and Randy Johnson.
He's got 4 or 5 different pitches that all come out of the same exact tunnel. The visual on all 4 or 5 of his pitches look like fastball and become something else.
One way hitters identify a pitch is by gauging a pitcher's arm angle. Rivera's remarkably consistent arm slot, varying less than 2 degrees, helps disguise the type of pitch he's throwing. Another way hitters try to identify pitches is by spin. Rivera's 4-seam fastball leaves his hand at 90+ miles an hour, rotating at roughly 1,500 RPM along a vertical axis, adjusting his grip by a few millimeters, literally a stitch or two, and altering fingertip pressure. Rivera's cutter leaves his hand just as fast, but spins on a tilted axis at up to 1,600 RPM. Spin creates pressure differentials in the airflow on each side of a ball, and the ball curves toward the lower pressure zone. This phenomenon is known as the Magnus effect, and the faster the spin, the greater the curve. To a batter's eye, the spin and velocity of Rivera's cutter look like his standard fastball. But since hitters only have about 1/1700ths of a second to correctly identify a pitch, they're usually wrong. By the time Rivera's cutter reaches the plate, it's moved laterally up to 8 inches. And the majority of that movement is in the last 10 feet of the ball's flight. At that point, the human eye is physically unable to actually see a ball traveling that fast. And even if a hitter makes contact, it's virtually impossible for him to get the roughly 4-inch sweet spot of the bat on the ball. But the biggest problem for hitters might be their lack of experience facing Rivera. Most hitters face about 2,300 pitches in a season, but they'll be lucky if they see a handful of Rivera's cutters. Aroldis Chapman's 105-mile-an-hour heater is the fastest pitch ever thrown. And that pitch wasn't a fluke. In 1 1/3 innings, Chapman threw 25 pitches, and every one of them was clocked at over 100 miles an hour. But how does he do it? Pitching coach Tom House has worked with some of the game's hardest throwers, including Nolan Ryan and Randy Johnson.
What you have here is a CC Sabathia upper body and a Randy Johnson lower body. That's why he throws 105 miles an hour.
First, his stride. The typical stride length for a pitcher is about 87% of his height, but Chapman's stride averages 120% of his 6'4" height, approaching 7.5 feet. His stride isn't just long, it's fast, taking only 0.8 of a second, 15% faster than average pitchers. Next, shoulder turn. The twisting angles between his front hip and his back shoulder create massive torque.
80% of velocity comes from hip and shoulder separation.
Elite power pitchers like Randy Johnson create angles of 40 to 60 degrees, but Chapman's is close to 65 degrees. Next, delivery.
The thing that separates him is a lot of pitchers could get to that, but how soon does it get to here?
The average pitcher uncocks his forearm in 7 to 900ths of a second. Chapman's arm fires in less than 400ths of a second. Average pitchers release the ball directly over the front foot. Chapman's release point, up to 12 inches in front of his foot, amplifies the difficulty of hitting him.
Not only does he throw hard, he throws close. 1 foot of distance is 3 miles an hour to the hitter's eyes. So not only on the real gun, 105, but you could almost add 3 more miles an hour to that. You may be looking at the hardest throwing individual that's ever been on this planet.
And when you're trying to hit the planet's fastest pitcher, there's virtually no time to think. Facing a 90-mile-an-hour pitch, a batter has 900ths of a second to decide whether or not to swing. But if Chapman unleashes a 105-mile-an-hour missile, that window shrinks by 66%. The batter must make his decision in only 0.03 of a second.